my goodness. Hello, Duncan. So lovely to meet you. Do you want to tell our amazing listeners a little bit about you and a little bit about why you're here today and where you're calling us from?
Okay. Well, I go in reverse order there. I'm calling from Los Angeles, from kind of the northeast or northwest part. It's called Van Nuys in the San Fernando Valley, and there's a lot of production around here. And I've been working in the entertainment industry for a long time. Um, but let's see. You wanted to know a little about me. I'm a writer. By calling, not by profession necessarily at the moment, but I am writing and writing and writing and publishing and publishing and publishing. So something will stick. A lot of what I write about is mental health, autofiction. I had an experience not after a lot of traumatic employment experiences. I finally just had a nervous collapse of sorts, and it turned out to be a manic episode, but I didn't know it at the time, and they called it
Mm,
something else. And um, so I am going to go as far back as those stories, if it's all right to tell you about the
totally.
terrible
Yeah.
stress that I got from being mistreated as an employee. Um, and I hope that when we get to the solutions phase, I'll have some ideas, because I don't know that I handled any of this the way you're supposed to, but I did what I could. Um, so shall I start at the beginning of my working career? I'm not going to go through
Yeah.
everything, but okay. So one of
Yeah.
my first jobs in the summer between junior and senior year of high school, 11th and 12th grade, was at a record store in Boston. And a record store, for those of you who are young enough not to know what it
True.
is where you would go and all the cool people would go to buy their music, and you would connect, and it was like a hangout. And so I wanted to be a part of that. I wanted to work at a record store, and this new record store was opening up, and I ran into the owners and I said, will you please hire me? And they were like, I don't know, you got no experience. And they hired me. But they were really abusive. And I'll give them names just to make it easier. There's Alan and Glenda. That's not their real names. Alan and
Okay.
Glenda were like the most sadistic employers I think I've ever had. Like, I've had some bad employers, but they topped the cake. They were so mean to me. And like, on my very first day, they gave me a job. They handed me a straight razor, like you would put in an X-Acto thing, but they didn't
Hmm.
have one. So they just gave me the razor, and they said, okay, this window is two-way glass and we need you to scratch the backing off of it. And so, like, an hour later, I had like maybe this much scratched off, because it was like solidly on there. And they came in screaming at me like, you're useless. And I'm like, blah, 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 and then that set the tone from then on. They kept threatening to fire me, saying I was no good. I was good at my job. I mean, I was a great cashier, and I always helped people find the right music, but they had it in for me, I thought. I was one of only two employees, and they treated the other employee poorly too, but we didn't work at the same time, so I didn't know
Hmm.
that. In When I moved to New York City to go to college, I was there in the summer. I needed a job. I thought I had one. It fell through. So I actually went back to Alan and Glenda and said, I need a job. I'm in New York and I need to pay my rent. And they were like, okay, well, we'll hire you, $5 an hour under the table. And I was like, oh, great. $5 an hour. It sounded like, because it was 3.50 an
Hmm.
hour in Boston, right? So, at that time, minimum wage was like $4 or something. So it wasn't
Right.
as abusive as it sounds, but, um, they just laid into me like every chance they got. They had a bootlegging operation, which, again, I don't know if anyone knows what that is anymore, but they made
Probably
illegal
not.
they had recordings of concerts, and they turned them into vinyl, which at the time was the
Whoopsie.
gold standard. And yeah, yeah, so they had like these presses and stuff, and they were like, you can never talk about those. And because I asked them about it, I said, what's in that place? And the guy from Boston that I worked with, he moved down, and we started working together side by side. And I saw that they were giving him the same heinous tasks that I had, like I need you to unroll every poster and roll it back up and put it in. I'm like, you don't want me to label it or anything? No, blah, blah, blah. So, uh, I was just this like sweet, gentle kid, and I didn't know that being abused like that wasn't okay. So I took it as long as I could, and then I dyed my hair like pink and black, I think. And I came into work, and they were like, "You're fired. We don't like your hair." So
Of course, they
there I
didn't
was.
like your hair.
Yeah, and
But
then
like
I
this
went.
is like part of like punk rock era. What that's and you're like
Yeah,
working
is
at a
That's the hair
record
you
store.
need
That
now.
that yeah, I would be like
yeah,
sweet, rock on. Like I don't
yeah.
understand that.
I wish you'd been my boss, Gina. That would have been nice. Uh, they did not get it. They were so square and so mean. And the truth is that years later, I ran into my friend that worked there with me on a BART platform in San Francisco. And we hugged each other like Holocaust survivors. Like we were in tears, like, you made it, you made it. Like we hadn't, there was no threat of us dying, but we had been through this horrible trauma of working for these people. And it was, it really drove it home for me, because later I had jobs where I had nice bosses, and and where nothing went wrong. And I thought, oh my God, I can't believe I subjected myself to that for so long.
Right.
Um, I was starting to have mental health issues in New York because it's very stressful there, and seems to be the trigger. So I made a decision to just leave Columbia University, and I dropped out. I basically dropped out. I didn't know I was dropping out. I was taking a leave of absence. And then I went to San Francisco, and I got a job at one of the coolest bars. It just closed, so I think I can say its name, the Stud Bar, back when it was on Folsom Street, which is like ancient history. And that was a great place to work. Again, I wanted to be in the cool place, and it was the coolest gay bar in San Francisco. And but I was underage, and I was lying about my age, and somebody found out, and he thought he could sexually somehow insert himself into my life sexually by threatening to tell on me. And that wasn't the straw that broke the camel's back, because right after he did that, I'll call him Daisy. He's not alive anymore, but I just don't want to besmirch his
Yeah.
name, because
Yeah.
um, so Daisy, you know, I was going to go to the boss about it, but then the bar closed temporarily to move, and we thought it was just going to be like a week, but it turned out to be 6 months.
Oh
And
wow.
we were all asked to work at the new bar, getting it ready for free.
What?
So yeah, for free. And I had very low rent because I was living in a terrible neighborhood in San Francisco, but um, it was like 350 a month, which sounds like nothing now, but to come up
Mm.
at five, again, it was, I think, $7 an hour under the table at the Stud. And so $350 was 50 hours of work, and I had 0 hours of work. And that was actually the last straw. That losing my income, just, and not knowing what was going to happen next, just sent me into a manic episode, and I got hospitalized. So I don't blame the Stud for my mental well-being so much as just uh, those kinds of situations that are sort of toxic. They ran the place where they called you family, and family helps each other out, and
We
they were
know that.
using.
We know that well.
We know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was nice to be a part of such an interesting family, but I didn't, it was a very exploitative family too at that time. I think they really cleaned up their act in the 90s, but back in the 80s, it was still a little
Mm-hmm.
sketchy. So, and then I went on to have a series of okay jobs that some of them don't even sound like they'd be good. But I worked in at a phone sex office, and my boss was wonderful. She and I were both in recovery, so there was a lot of um, support, and all the people that worked there were so cool. A lot of punk rockers and stuff. It was I didn't talk on the phone sexually. I dispatched calls to the fantasy makers, but which
I love how you call them the fantasy makers. That's
yeah, that was
amazing.
their name.
Oh my God, I love it.
I do
Yeah,
too. I think that's
I'm
amazing.
dead. I'm
yeah.
dead.
And I mean, it could have been a very toxic workplace. And I heard about another phone sex office where people were totally traumatized working there, but this one was run by someone who was trying to get their life together and be a better person. So it was a healthy workplace, of all places,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
And they were very supportive of me with my mental recovery and my um, recovery from addiction and things. So it was a good place to work. And then I will warn you before I go on that sometimes I get a little weepy. It's just like partly just who I am and partly a symptom of my condition. But so if I get weepy, don't mind me. I probably won't stay that way.
Oh, don't mind me. I'll just get weepy with you, buddy.
Me too,
All right.
probably.
Oh my God, we're a bunch of soft marshmallows, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Um, I'm definitely a marshmallow. So I had a series of good jobs after that. I worked at the phone sex place until I graduated college, and then I worked at the Italian Cultural Institute, where I had the best boss of my life. He was an Italian diplomat, and he was just so relaxed. And I would get all worried because I was traumatized by former bosses, so I was like, I'm messing up, and he was just like, Duncan, sentiti, relax, right? Just
Yeah.
sit down, relax, don't worry. Work is not worth it, and it was such a wonderful experience to work for him. And it really colored a lot of the way I approached workplace trauma in the future, because I had that foundation of like, oh, yeah, the Italians really know how to do it. Work is not, you're not defined by your job. And, he taught me a lot of things. So that was a great experience. When he left and the new boss came in, I didn't get along with her very well, but it wasn't toxic. It was just, um, I was so used to, there actually was a toxic situation. It wasn't mine. My boss, the one who was so nice, he was at odds with his superior, and so the
Mhm.
superior pulled all the money, and we had no money. So, I mean, we had just enough to keep the office open, have volunteers, and then pay the three employees, right? And then that was all
Mhm.
he would let us have. So I had gotten in the habit of thinking, we can't do that, and I was coming up with free things. I started a radio show because we had a huge record collection. Um, and all that was free. And then she came along and she just had these big budget ideas, and I was shutting them down, going, you can't do that, you can't do that. But it turned out she could, because I didn't know that we had been
Yeah.
cut off financially, and our budget expanded exponentially. So it was cool, but they were never going to pay me what I was worth, because I wasn't an Italian citizen. So um, I got a lot of advice from wealthy people that hung out there that said, if you want to make it in this world, you can't be working for the Italian government. You're never going to get anywhere.
Mhm.
And I
Okay.
wanted to go to Hollywood, so I did. And my first job in Hollywood was great. I had a few episodes where I was still like learning about my mental health, and I would get really angry at work, and I didn't know that that was like a symptom of bipolar. So I just thought I was a bad person when I got really angry and like yelled at somebody. Not they weren't. I was just yell at peers. I didn't have anyone working for me. Um, but then that kind of hurt my career. Like I wasn't able to advance at New Line Cinema because I had been um, a bit of a misbehaving, and I didn't know.
Mhm.
Like I could have,
Mm.
if I'd known then what I know now, I think I would have apologized, talked about it with somebody who was sympathetic, and asked if there was anything we could do to like minimize the kind of stress that would lead me to that. But I didn't know. So, and that was nobody's fault. So there's not really, but I will get to the toxic part. Eventually I started to work in, I had lost a job, and I was between jobs, and I found a way to work on a TV show, and I was really excited to be a part of like an actual production. And it was a pilot, and as an aspiring writer, it was really meaningful to me that I got the position of writer's assistant. And the writing team was two people. One of them was a total sweetheart, but she wasn't very healthy. She was having health problems, so she
Yeah.
wasn't there very often. And the other one, who I will call Ron Masterson,
Mhm.
was just evil. I mean, I think what happened was it was his first pilot that he got to produce as an executive producer writer. And
Hmm.
he was so excited and so wanting it to succeed that he got kind of drunk with power, and he just started laying into me about everything. Like, "You're not laughing at me enough," was one of the things he said. And I'm like, "Not
I'm sorry,
laughing at
what?
me." He
Yeah.
said, yeah, well, I mean, it was a comedy and he wanted to be funny. So it was like, he was basically instructing me to manufacture laughs. And I said, "I think it would be better if you were funny," um, which was the wrong thing to say.
That's actually funny.
Yeah. And so one of the incidents I'll tell you about that it was so Hollywood and so ridiculous. He wanted a sandwich from this really good deli called Factors. And I said, "Oh, I'll get you the sandwich." And he gave me the order, and he said very specifically, "I want my mustard on the side." And I said, "Okay." Or, yeah, let's just say mustard on the side. And I said, "Okay." I placed the order. I was very clear about mustard on the side. Went and picked up the sandwich, brought it to him, and he said, "They put mustard inside in addition to the mustard on the side." And I said,
Oh.
"Oh, you want me to go back?" And he said, "No, it's too late." And you should have known. And I said, "You mean I should have unwrapped the sandwich and put my fingers on it
Inside.
and looked inside it to find out whether or not they'd added mustard to it when there was mustard on the side?" And
Yes.
he said, "Absolutely." And he was just, that was like a light went off, like, "Oh my God, I really am working for abusive people again." And it brought back a lot of trauma. And then I think partly because of my mental health condition, or for lack of a better term, I didn't have a lot of self-confidence to fight back in a direct way. Like, you heard me be kind of passive aggressive, like, "I think you should be funny." That's not really, but it not, I wasn't clear. I didn't say, "No, I'm not going to laugh at you unless you are funny." Or
Right.
something a little more direct. So I had trouble with confrontation. I was afraid of it because I felt like people would find out there was something wrong with me, or um, it's just a lot of, it's all old gunk that I've kind of cleaned out now. But back then it was stigma, and it was really hanging over me and affecting my performance at work, because I doubted myself so much, and my ability um, to have boundaries and allow people, uh, you know, give people the dignity of a proper response, even if they're horrible. So the worst thing on that pilot didn't get picked up. And on the last day that we were shooting, it was 2 days after the last day of shooting, and they said, "You don't have to come into work today." So I said, "Oh." It was like my first day off since they started. And a friend was in town, and she said, "I'm going to Disneyland." And she was visiting from like Portland, Oregon. And I was like, "I'm going with you." I wanted to spend the day with my friend. So
Fun.
I get to Disneyland, and we go into the enchanted tiki room. So I turn off my phone, and we listen to the birds singing the words. All the birds sing words, and the flowers croon in the tiki 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 room. And I was having a great time. And I get out and I look at my phone, and there's 17 messages, right? And I was like, "Oh," and they were all from Ron Masterson. And Ron said, "Duncan, where the fuck are you? You need to pick Ellen up because we have blah." I don't know. It was some reading or some meeting that I was. Oh, I said her name. Sorry.
That's okay. I can edit it out. Don't stress.
Okay. All right. So he said, "You need to pick up my partner, who I was her official driver basically because of her health." And I felt terrible because she's a sweet person and I wasn't there to pick her up, but they had told me I had the day off. So I said, "You gave me the day off." And he said, "That doesn't mean you can't." It was another one of those impossible situations where he's like, "Well, you need to come in right now." And I said, "I just got out of the tiki room at Disneyland. I don't think by the time I got there, it would be way too late." And he was just like, "Well, you're fired." And I said, "Well, my last day of work would have been today anyway, so just don't pay me for today."
Yikes.
Um, and then I thought that would be the end of my career in TV, because I figured he would tell everybody what I did. But it turns out he didn't tell everybody. And a couple of people that I worked with on that pilot got picked up for a series, and they were like, "We want Duncan to work with us." So I said, "Oh,
Oh,
cool."
that's so
so
cool. Yeah.
So I felt like, oh, I felt validated. So I went to work on this series, but my position wasn't the right one. I wasn't a writer's assistant. The writers were all really nice on that show. I was the producer's assistant, and the producer was okay. He was trying really hard to be a good boss, but he had four bosses coming at him from four different directions. So he was trying to delegate stuff to me that I didn't know how to do. Um, he had me move a table, and I had a bad back, and I was too afraid to tell him, and I threw my back out and I had to come to work in a cane the next day. And these aren't his fault. This is me not speaking up for myself.
Yeah.
And I would never say that he was a bad boss. He was not the problem. He could see that I was struggling, and he was trying to help me, but he had no time. He had, one studio was producing it, another studio was going to air it, and we were on the lot of a third studio, and then there was the agency, and everybody working on it was all from the same agency, and the agency had all this control. So the abusive incident didn't come from my boss, it came from the agency.
Okay.
My boss is on a set. They lock the door. Your cell phones are all off. You cannot come or go while the set is hot, right? While the people are
Okay.
live on air, as they call it. It's not on air, but it's not live even, but they're recording, and you can't come or go. And this guy from the agency, who I don't remember his name, so I'm going to call him Butthead. Butthead called up and said, I need to speak to your boss. And I said, oh, I'm sorry. They're filming right now, and he's in the lock thing. I will be waiting by the door to give him your message, because I knew that these people were like the most high maintenance, and you had to be really careful with them. And he was like, that's not good enough. And I said, I can't do any better. And he said, and it turned out he used to work for my boss. And he said, I used to work for your boss, and I know that he would tear your throat out. And like he was, and then he started cussing me out. He's like, and I could tell he was on coke. Like it was like,
Wait, what year was
right?
this? Was this like the 80s or 90s?
No. This was 2002, I guess, about
okay.
then.
Okay.
And he started to say, you motherfucker, and he just went off with like the worst, foulest language, and I just kept saying I wouldn't say that, or I didn't know what to say. I mean, he's saying, you need to do something about this. I need to speak to him right now. This is urgent. And I finally just said, I don't know. I can't talk right now. I'm on the phone. And I hung up. Which is a line from Mary Hartman that I like to use when I'm kind of panicking. I get panicky on the phone as it is. Always have. And
I do too.
And that was like set off a major panic attack. And as soon as my boss got out, I ran to him and I said, Butthead said he has to talk to you. And he said, oh my God, okay, great. And he goes, and he's like going, uh-huh. And I knew that the guy was like just smearing my name to my boss. And he came out and he was like, we need to talk. And I was like, okay. And I go in to talk to him, and there was nothing I could do. I said, you were on the locked set. There was no way I could. Well, you got to do better than that. And that was, yeah, no, that's Hollywood. That's like, sorry, that's not good enough. They also asked me they gave me a task that I had no idea how to do, which was to get clearance for them to use a baseball cap in an episode. So I had to call Major League Baseball.
That's not even like in your purview. Like that's not even in your wheelhouse.
Oh, I was the producer's assistant. Yeah, it wasn't in my wheelhouse for sure, but it was. I called Major League Baseball and I said, hey, I'm on this show and we want to use one of your baseball hats in an episode. And they said, great. Well, there's a 3-week turnaround. And the episode was being filmed 2 days later. And I said, that's not good enough. I'm sorry. I need it in 2 days. I said, well, tough luck, and they hung up on me. And I had to go back to my boss with that. And he fired me. He said, I can't put up with this. And to tell you the truth, it was like the best feeling in the world to be fired. I was like, oh, thank God I can get unemployment.
You were relieved.
Yeah. And I got unemployment, and and I got to keep my medical care for like a year because they had a really generous medical thing. So, and then I found gainful employment. So I have a long career, and I don't want to, I don't know where we're at time wise. Let's see. I've got a few minutes still, right?
Oh yeah, you're good. You're good.
Okay. So there's more abuse to talk about. And this time it was really different. I worked at a large company. It wasn't a small production. Even though a TV production is a lot of people, it's still relatively small. This was like a 10,000 people company that was in the entertainment industry, kind of on the side. And they ended up like figuring out that I was mentally ill, and they started using it, like, not against me. There was somebody they didn't want working there, and I had one of those blow up episodes with her because she was like making me crazy, for lack of a better term. But she wasn't a bad person, and she was good at her job usually. She just wasn't good at her job in this one case where it was so frustrating that I broke down and yelled. And they heard about it. They gave me a week off. And then when I came back, they started kind of bringing me into HR and saying, now, did this episode happen because this lady talked to you? And I didn't know what they were doing. And I was like, well, yeah, I mean, she's saying, that let's lose $1 million because you're not allowed to bill it, and I was saying, yeah, we're allowed to bill for work we did. And she was like, well, it needs to go through anyway. So it was just this crazy back and forth with her. And yeah, she was difficult, but she did do a pretty good job. And I've always felt
Yeah.
bad about this. I didn't know that's what they were doing. And they fired her, saying that you provoked a mental health incident with our employee.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And
Whoa.
so that felt bad in a whole different way. It was toxic and it was abusive, but not directed at me directly.
No,
I
they
was
used
the
you as like a
tool.
pawn. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that felt really cheap. And at first I
Mm-hmm.
was really happy she was gone because she was really bad. And then I realized that wasn't cool.
Yeah.
Like it
Yeah.
was like there was like a day or two where I was like, yay. And then I'm like, oh, wait, they used
And then you
me.
started thinking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and I left that company and I went to another one, a competitor, and then the competitor bought that company. So
Oh God.
my mental health record was clean at the other company, but they had it at the old company, and so it got into the HR. And as soon as they figured out what was going on, things started to happen again, and I wasn't letting them get away with it. I was being careful not to let them use me as a pawn. But I did notice that a friend of mine who also had she had to take a leave of absence for about 3 months while they worked on her
Yeah.
mental condition, that she needed to have stabilized. And she came back and she was I barely knew her. Like I actually didn't know her. I sat next to her and then she told me she'd been away having a hard time. And I said, that's happened to me too. And so we bonded and we were, I felt close with her. I really liked her. And then she said, I'm so afraid they're going to fire me because of this. And I said, they're not allowed to. And she said, it doesn't matter. I've seen them do it before. Because it was a different company now. It was the company that I left one company that was publicly traded for this private company that took the other company private. And when it's private, the rules are a little different.
Yeah.
They're not allowed to do it in California, but they do because
Yeah.
there's not as much oversight. And
Mm-hmm.
sure enough, 2 years to the day that she came back, they fired her. They said, "Oh, we're having layoffs," but she was the only one laid off.
Oh,
So I cried and hugged her. And then I had so much pressure on me. I was going to business school and I was like working for the C-suite and there was all this pressure on me. And I had a little bit of I was like hypomanic. I was feeling really just like, and my doctor said, look, I need to give you some time away from there, giving you 3 months. And we want you to go to this program at the hospital where you just kind of it was like day treatment. You just go and work with mostly therapists and then a psychiatrist to kind of calm down and get better. So I was so afraid to do it. I said, they're going to fire me. They're going to fire me. And he said, they're not allowed to. And a couple years later, they let me go. So I don't know if that was related or not, but it felt like they were looking for a way to get rid of me. And they did a very gentle job of it. They placed me at a movie studio and said, you're our employee, but you're at the movie studio. And then at the end of the year, they said, our budget changed and you're not our employee, but I think the movie studio will hire you. And they did at like not even, it was like less than 2/3 of what I was making at the other
Mm.
company. So
Oh.
I had a huge demotion in terms of pay, and there was nothing I could do about it because I was over a barrel. I could have left and gone
Mhm.
somewhere else, but because of my fear around my stigma and fear and shame around my mental health, I was afraid to do that. So I stayed and I worked my way up, and I actually, um, I got hired, but the person who hired me was incredibly abusive, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I was in a wheelchair at the time because I'd broken my ankle, and so I just felt like I couldn't go anywhere, do anything, and I was just stuck with this mean boss. And but one of her, she was like way up, like
Yeah.
senior, and then one of her regular VPs was very fond of me, and he was being pulled onto a project, and he pulled me on, and then eventually I had to stop being an employee and be a contractor, and that's when things got sort of weird again. As a contractor, you don't have the same status as an employee. You're kind of um, a vendor, like you have
Yeah.
to like coddle the client. They're your client now. You're not an employee. You're a client. You're a salesperson with a client, and it was okay. They paid me really well, and health insurance was through the roof. I had to pay for it myself, but um, it was still a good deal, and I was making the most money I'd ever made in my life. But it was doing work that I wasn't really confident that I was good at. Like, it was at the beginning, it was stuff I could do, but then as they moved me up, it was like, oh, I didn't know coding. I'm too old to know like SQL. It's just, it wasn't in my wheelhouse.
Hmm.
Um, and that's when I think this will be the last abusive incident I'll talk about. But one of my peers, but he was an employee, he called me up. This was during the pandemic, and he laid into me, and he just said, "You are the worst data analyst I've ever worked with. You're an embarrassment. I if anybody ever asked me if I wanted to be with you if you were up for a project I'm on, I would tell them absolutely not in any way." And the problem is that he's my client, and I'm not allowed to speak back to him. So I had to just sit there and take it. And I just kept, this is at this point I'd learned some coping strategies, and I don't know if
Mm.
this was it was still passive aggressive, but I just kept nodding to myself and going, mm-hmm. And
Mm.
when he was done, he was waiting for me to yell at him so that he could get me fired or something. And I just said, "Well, I'm sorry you feel that way. That sounds really difficult for you, I imagine." Uh,
That is the
and then,
most passive aggressive. I love it.
but
That must be so
you have,
difficult that you're so mad at me.
yeah, I'm so sorry that
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 I've
you're
angered you
angry.
to a point that you just want to yell.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ooh, that must
And
be real tough for you, man.
So
yeah.
I
And
love
then
this. Okay,
shortly
carry
after
on.
that, yeah, no, it was brutal. And then shortly after that, I was separated from that person and not allowed to work with him directly, but we had to work together because we were working on the same thing. And
yeah.
so it was very awkward. And um, it was like he managed to get me in trouble almost, like, even though he was the one that did the wrong thing, because I'm the contractor, I have to just suck it up. And
Yep.
yeah, and then I became aware of this term, ableism and stigma. There are a couple of words associated with um, various health conditions, handicaps, mental illness. Ableism is living in a world where people who don't have a problem think that everything should be geared to them, and that they don't have time for anything, related to somebody who's got a little extra struggle at work. And I felt like that that became my mission, because I'd already been writing novels about what happened to me in my mental health journey. And so I was trying to promote them, and I was like, well, they're fiction, but they're autobiographical fiction. How do I promote this? How do I no agent would touch them. And so I just published them myself, and did like grassroots marketing, which has never been that successful with me, but it did get
Mhm.
word out there, and I had a lot of positive reaction from people, especially people who worked in the mental health field, because they said that there's no books out there that tell them what their patients are thinking, and this book did that. These books, I wrote 5 of them. These books give me a complete inside view of what's going on in the mind of these people that I don't understand, including psychiatrists have told me this. So, um, at the point at which there was a point where the project just got derailed because of the person that yelled at me. Actually, he was instrumental in the derailing of the project. And when that happened, I said, "Oh, well, I don't think I'm gonna I don't think I'm good enough at this. I know they're going to let me go." And they did. And I was relieved. And I said, you know what? Now I get to work full time on my writing. I'd saved up money while I was making money there. And so I'm living on my savings right now, working on getting my writing out there. And I didn't really write too much about toxic workplace, so I won't spend a lot of time on it, but just seeing things through a new lens, the lens of living with mental health stigma and confronting ableism. I was I got a mission. Like, I understood now why my books exist, is that I need to protect people and let them know. I mean, not mother hen protect, but stand up for people who are less protected by society and less protected at work. Um, my story is a roller coaster of good jobs and bad jobs, and the bad jobs were really bad, and a lot of them were bad because I didn't think I was worth standing up for myself, and I don't think people should feel that way ever. So my books are geared towards that, helping people who are differently abled to stand up for themselves. Gay also, I'm a gay man, and so um, I include the LGBTQ plus community in my web of protectiveness with the books that
Mm.
I write, and I'm publishing too. So I'm publishing some books for people. Um, and so that was my journey. And I guess now that I've told you an exhaustive history of abuse, do you have a new question for me?
Oh, I absolutely do. And
Okay.
I think this was one of the things that really piqued my interest around the entertainment industry as well, was that there is this expectation, almost unrealistic expectation, that there is this I want to say almost like modern slavery associated with how businesses are being run in that entertainment industry space, where
Yeah.
you have contractors that can be let go at any time, at will employees, cool, but they're not getting the benefits of a standard employee. But then they're also pushed into working these unbelievably long hours. The bid
Yeah.
days for work are potentially, the bid days are outside of expectations. So,
16-hour days. Yeah.
you've got let's say, for example, a bid day, you would have you've got 2 days to do 5 days worth of work. And that's what these entertainment I want to say cogs are
Yeah.
creating. And I wonder if this is something that you've observed as well, is it just kind of perpetuates the toxicity.
Yeah.
It just perpetuates it further down. And I wonder, I'm making a very broad statement here, but I wonder if a lot of entertainment industry people do actually, or have kind of been forced into struggling with mental health because they're not getting sleep, there's zero work-life balance, they're being pushed constantly at a really high stress level space. Every shot or every delivery is a 911. It's
And they're not saving lives.
It's not saving lives. You're
Yeah.
fucking making make work with pretty pictures for some twat somewhere to watch on Netflix.
Right.
You know, so I'm just curious to know, like, do you feel it's perpetuated? Like, do you feel that the people working there are themselves becoming toxic and that's kind of spreading out as well?
Yes. I think I mentioned like an example of that would be that producer that I worked for, where he had 4 unreasonable bosses, including the one that yelled at me, who used to work for him. Um, he said he was being pecked to death by ducks, and he looked like he was on the verge of tears in certain days. It was just so hard. And he was a really, really mentally stable, grounded person, and he was coming off the rails. So when he let me go, we were both, it was like, he was doing me a favor. Like, he was stuck there, he couldn't get out of it, but I could, and so he let me go. And yeah, I think also it's not always because somebody was, I think maybe I don't know what the history of this writer is, who had been a staff writer, and whether he got abused a lot as a staff writer.
Yeah.
But the one I call Ron Masterson, when with the abusive mustard story, he may have been bullied a lot when he was getting into the entertainment industry, and then he's perpetuating that bullying because he's got a taste of power, and you know, power corrupts people. And I think maybe he just saw it as an opportunity to lash out at somebody else, and initiate somebody else, and haze somebody else, kind of, you know.
Oh, for sure.
So there's sympathy built into that. His co-writer, she was an angel. She was the sweetest person. So I don't know why he was like that, but that's how it went. Agents probably have horrible bosses. So that agent that was yelling at me probably had somebody horrible yelling at him. But I don't know. You don't always see the chain of evil. It's just going on, right?
And it's hard, like, especially if you're dealing with like a mental illness, to not take it personally. Because like, I suffer from depression, and before I, got on something that worked for me, like, I was so like sensitive, and I would take everything so personally because I'm already like self-harming with my own internal thoughts. I'm like, you're such a piece of shit, like, because I'm depressed all the time. So it's like I have such terrible self-talk in my head that I'm like, see, of course, of course,
it's
like,
agreeing with
they
you.
hate me.
They say you're a piece of shit, then you're like, yeah, I am. You're right. There's nothing I can do.
And it's like, see, I knew it.
Yeah.
And it's like, until I both matured in my work, my career, and also got on medication that really worked for me, did I start to be able to kind of unpack all of that, and really become like more emotionally mature. Because when you're in the depths of depression or whatever you have, you're just barely trying to survive. You're in survival mode, which is not a great place to be in at all.
I know. I was diagnosed with depression initially shortly after that manic episode, and then the depression was very long. The cycle was like one manic episode and then 20 years of depression. And it was definitely like, I would say I felt like I had shoes made of lead, like just trying to get up and get to work. And I was really lucky that while that was happening, I was working at that wonderful phone sex office with the great boss, and she was super supportive and helpful. And she's like, you need to be on antidepressants, and I was like, oh, I can't take drugs, I'm in the program. No.
Oh my God, that was the biggest disservice that the program did to me. Because in like the early 2000s, whether you're in NA or AA, they weren't what I find it to be totally against the traditions, that people would come and tell you, if you take an antidepressant, it's mind altering. No, it's not. If your synapses are not working properly, there's something chemically wrong with you. So why not
use a bandage for a cut? Yeah.
Right. Or like insulin for a diabetic. It's like,
Right.
and it like, it people telling me like that I just had to work a program better or pray more or turn it over, that was the worst I could have ever been told, because you're already in such a vulnerable, and this was like early on in my sobriety, so
Yeah.
I didn't know what to share and what not to share. I quickly learned,
Mm,
because that gave me like another 6 months of mental torture where I became so suicidal. Like my mom was scared and she came to live with me in my little studio apartment on the Upper East Side. Like got really scary, and it wasn't that guy's fault who said that to me, but it was like that was sort of the overall thought of AA or NA at that time. Like you can't take anything. And then finally someone was like, actually, no, there's a whole portion in our stuff that says we are not doctors.
yeah.
And that's what kind
Yeah.
of got me over the hump. And then I was finally like, you know what? I'm so fucking miserable. Like, if this medication doesn't work, then I'm going to just off myself. And thankfully, there was a
It
big
worked.
improvement within like literally 72 hours. It was already, and I'm like, you know what? That's how like sapped my brain was of whatever, whatever it was
Yeah.
that I
Whatever
needed.
neurotransmitters that you needed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
I totally get that. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I have to say, I've found this, conversation great. I think, we've really highlighted and we've really made very vulnerable, kind of the real situations that happen when kind of toxic workplaces are so bad that they actually mess up your entire brain chemistry. And I understand, Duncan, that you obviously had some stuff happening there already, like there was stuff that was
Yeah.
to
I
be
think,
discovered, I guess.
right.
um but it's unbelievable how we kind of negate away or just like flew away, oh, I'm feeling really shit in this job, but we don't really say, actually, maybe I need to get that proper assessment or proper mental health focus for it.
It's just very hard because it's an invisible. When I was in a wheelchair, people were really helpful, because they could see that I was struggling. They'd open a door for me, or they'd, you know, tell other people to stop hanging out in the handicapped stall because Duncan needs it, or whatever, right? I mean, just there
Wait,
was a lot of,
I need to know who's hanging out in the handicap stall.
oh, that's where people go to check their messages and stuff. You know what I mean? Like, and
Okay.
they just, it's like, it's big and it's like their office, because they have a cubicle and they can go anyway. So
Okay.
finally the word got out. Oh, that's actually not cool because that is reserved for handicapped people. And if Duncan's in there, you get the F out, right?
Yeah.
But
Sort your
when it
shit
comes
out,
to
kids.
mental health, you can't say, stop being abusive to Duncan because it messes with his head. Like they just, I mean, you could, but it doesn't happen. Nobody would stand up for me and I was afraid to tell people what was going on with me because
Mm.
I'd seen people get fired. I think I may have been fired. There's
Yeah,
a
of
lot
course.
of,
You're nervous, you're scared, like of
yeah,
course you would be. Like
yeah.
it would be ridiculous to think otherwise.
Hmm.
For
Yeah.
years on job applications, they would say, "Do you have a disability?" And I
No.
would just click, "Nope, no disability," and I did, and I knew I did, and I thought, well, it's invisible and they don't know about it. And I don't know what would have happened at that time back in, the 90s. I don't know if checking that I did would have made things worse, or
I
Yeah.
feel
helped.
like it
But
would have, especially because
yeah,
like now therapy is much more therapy, and mental health is much more in the news. People, celebrities are getting behind it. People are being disclosing like things that have happened to them or whatever disease they're suffering from, whether it's anxiety, depression,
Yeah.
bipolar, which is not called bipolar anymore, I don't think. I forget what it's.
well, I think it's not called manic depression for sure.
Oh, is it
I
called bipolar?
I think
Maybe
it's
I got it
bipolar
backwards.
disorder, but you don't say he's bipolar because then it's saying he's a sickness, right?
Yeah.
He's a health condition. No, I'm
He
not.
has,
He is
has,
living with or has. I mean, you could say has, or I think
right.
the most polite one is he's living with bipolar disorder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So at least that's what I'm hearing in the literature, and I'm sure it'll change because everything that could potentially be pejorative eventually does become that. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
But yeah, I think it's, people are much more willing to talk about it now. So maybe back then, no. But like in the 90s, that was like Prozac Nation. You remember that book that came
mhm.
out? I was a Prozac Nation baby. Like when I was 16, I was put on Prozac. Um, and that was like the first big thing, right? And then you kind of stopped hearing about it for a minute. And then now I feel like it's coming back into the zeitgeist because people are being more open about it. So maybe
Yeah.
now, if you had disclosed it, it would benefit you. But I kind of think you're right. If it back in like the late 90s, early 2000s, it probably wasn't the best time to be that open about it.
No,
hmm
for sure. I
And
agree. I totally agree.
yeah, and yes, that definitely made me afraid. And it's only now recently, I mean, in the last 5 years, that I've realized I need to stand up for myself. I need to be out. Like it took me. I came out to my mother at 16 about being gay, and I thought that was going
Mhm.
to be the hardest thing I ever did. But it took me 30 plus years to come out with this mental illness, to say I am living with bipolar disorder and be proud of it, that I'm a survivor, um, and not, ashamed or feeling like something's going to happen because I spoke up and I told my truth, and now they're going to fire me, or people are going to think, oh, don't listen to him, he's
Mm,
crazy, or those kinds of um, fears that are left over from a period where it was true. But I don't think it's as true now. I know that the pandemic caused a lot of people to have
Mhm.
um, a lot of mental conditions to rise to the forefront because
Yeah,
people were isolated, and it can definitely stimulate depression, anxiety. um, I don't know, I don't know the numbers, but I know that they went up a lot.
they
And
did
so
for sure.
once once there's like 15 to 20% of the country that has a direct experience of it, let alone knowing somebody who's going through it, um, I think the conversation changes, because now it's like, oh, this is happening to me, this is happening to my friend, instead of just us quiet, invisible people that were kind of swept under
mm,
the rug in the 80s and 90s, and early 2000s. Now people recognize that we're living with a lot of stigma. It's treated so differently. If you broke your leg, nobody'd be like, oh, look at him, he has a broken leg, we should fire him. But look at him, he's crazy. Yeah, we need to fire him. So, and yeah, crazy is a bad word, but I use it
I use it
because it's
too.
a
I call my
shortcut.
medication my crazy pills. I'm like, oh,
Okay.
gotta take my crazy pill. Because if I
Yep,
don't,
yep.
it's not gonna be good.
I
Yeah.
call mine my nerve pills, which is like an old 50s
I
saying.
was gonna say that's like take it for your nerves. The thing is that I would like to know at this point is
Mhm.
looking back on everything you just shared with us, what do you think you could have done differently? What would you tell people who might be struggling right now in situations toxic or unhealthy or however we want to call it, who also have, mental health issues? Um, what would you suggest for them?
There's a few things they can do. There's a helpline at the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill here in the United States, and I imagine there's similar lines in much of the world. I'm sure New Zealand, or it's New Zealand, right? Yes, would have it, and Australia.
Yeah,
You call and talk to them about what's going on in your workplace, because they're going to know whether or not you can get a free lawyer. Things, if it gets to that point where you feel like
sure.
you need protection. If it's just a situation where somebody doesn't know that they're being, like if somebody keeps calling you crazy or something and they don't know that you have a mental illness, if there's someone that you trust, you can take them aside and say, look, I know you think this is funny, oh, you're so crazy, but it's hurting my feelings, and here's why. And I don't want you to feel bad. I just want you to stop hurting my feelings.
Yeah.
Or, but be mindful that not everybody is a safe person to do that with. Certainly your boss is. HR, I thought HR was like therapy. I would go in there and tell them everything, and then I realized that is not the way to do it.
No, do not do that.
Yeah, don't talk to them about anything except for, oh, I'm taking a leave of absence. Don't say, oh, because of bipolar disorder. Don't, they have no right to know. It's a health issue. I have a note from my doctor. That's it. Well, we need to know what it is. And you just say, no, you're not allowed to know that. And that's what I did when I had to take that leave of absence, but they still figured it out because of the records from the old
Sure,
job.
right.
Anyway, let me think of some other situations.
Well,
Some of the
what would
ones
you
that
have?
were just, oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
My question, my original question was, looking back on everything that you just shared, what do you think you could have done differently, knowing what you know now?
Knowing what I know now, that's a good question, because I mean, I saw that I would probably be asked that question when I was looking at the format for the show. And I do think that it's a hard one to answer because it's a long career, and the earlier part of the career, it wasn't as safe to do something about it as it is now.
Sure, right.
But and so that's why I'm giving kind of modern advice. But like for the situation where the guy was sexually harassing me because I was underage, that didn't have to do with mental health necessarily, but it contributed to a lot of things. I don't know how I got out from under that, but I did. I wish I could tell somebody, because that's a terrible situation where someone's
It is terrible when you're getting sexually harassed by anyone.
anyone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
whether they're, a boss or in
Or a
leadership, or
coworker.
they're your peer, right? Your coworker.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's terrible. Yeah. So do you think, so I guess for me, like you mentioned that you've yelled at people before. How would you handle, I mean, I don't, it's, look, I'm the first one to get like flustered with my clients, like with my regular work, like my clients, and just like, I realize I'm going to be 44, and I just realized I don't have a poker face. Right. So it's like, if you're pissing me off, you're going to see it. So,
Right.
so I'm the first one to like appear flustered, in a meeting if it's not going the way I want it to go. But, I don't know if I've ever yelled at anyone in a workplace setting. So obviously that's not what you set out to do,
I
was
would
yell at a
certainly not do
coworker.
it if I could avoid it. If even when my temper is at the top, I know now not to do that. I learned by doing it maybe 2 or 3 times in my career that my career was basically over at that company because I did it.
Because you
Um,
yelled.
because I yelled. That is, it's just upper management just says we can't have them in front of the client. We can't.
Yeah, you're like a
So
wild card.
right. So keep your temper if you can. And if you feel like you're losing your temper, nowadays, I think it would be safe to talk to your boss and say, I lost my temper and it's a symptom of something, a symptom
Hmm.
of my illness. And I'm going to work very hard not to do that again. I didn't do any of those things. I just like pretended like it didn't happen because it was so embarrassing.
Hmm.
And I didn't know why it happened. I didn't know that it was a symptom because I wasn't diagnosed with bipolar disorder until recently. So depression symptoms don't include screaming at people.
I don't
That's
know.
not
I
that
feel like they can,
they
because you're
could, I
so
guess. If
angry.
yeah, you're
Like when
right.
you're
It can
depressed,
come
it's
to the
like
surface.
there is like a level of being just angry, and it's kind of like
Yeah.
they say it's like anger turned inward. But like, yeah, for me, when I get to that place, which I haven't ever since I got on the right medication, like I become non-functioning, and become very irritable. Like, I just want
Yeah.
to be left alone, like in bed, like under the covers, don't bother me. So like when someone starts talking something to me and I'm like already in a super vulnerable place, I might lash out and be like, shut the fuck up, you know?
Yeah.
Hopefully not a coworker, like, but definitely my family. There was, I would be like, Mom, shut the fuck up or whatever, you know? Um,
Well, that's just, I felt like a lot of people in New York do that, but
right.
um,
But I would never
as a
say
sweet
that to her,
Californian, I
like,
was like,
yeah.
yeah,
I don't think I would say that to her unless she was, like, doing something really crazy or, like, I needed
yeah,
her to shut her mouth immediately because like, somebody's in harm or something, like, shut the fuck up. But, um but no, I mean, I think there is an element to the anger aspect. So, now, of course, if that had happened, you would know how to handle it properly. Um Okay, so what are you doing now that you're on the other side of this? And how was your diagnosis beneficial for you? Did it like kind of like were you kind of like, "Oh my God, now everything makes sense. My whole life makes
yes,
sense."
yes,
Yeah.
it definitely, like, there was a new lens to look at my whole work
Yeah.
history and go, oh, that's what was happening. Um, they have really good medication for it. I mean, they started me on, the old standard lithium, which is a heavy metal, and it got toxic. I was in a lot of pain, and I was telling my
Mm.
psychiatrist, I don't think this is the right medicine. And she said, there's some really great ones out there that are just right for you. And I was really nervous about it, but they gave me a new one, and it is perfect. I mean, um my mood is up and down, but it's not like up and down.
It's
It's
not
and
very
it's not
acute.
down, down, down.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
definitely like at a high normal,
Yeah.
and that's right where I want to be. It's like I have the energy to do the things that excite me, but I don't get all disorganized and you know
Mhm.
run from thing to thing to thing. So yeah, the question, I think I'm still answering it, is yes, being given the right diagnosis made all kinds of difference. It's helped me even in the program that I'm in now to say, okay, well, it it isn't an excuse exactly, because if you just keep excusing past behavior and it doesn't change, but it is a good, like, solid understanding of the challenges that I'm going to face as I'm trying to recover from um, not making enough money, which is
Right, right.
yeah. So
So
um,
I mean, I could kind of see that like in the arc of your story, like once you had the diagnosis, like I knew it was probably like a watershed moment. You were like, "Oh, that's why I was like a lunatic on that day or screaming crazy at someone that day." Like,
yeah,
yeah. Um, because that's how I would feel. Like I always knew I was depressed. I didn't need a doctor to tell me. It was like, yeah, thanks. No shit, Sherlock. But I did need a doctor to prescribe me the right thing. And this is a whole different topic, but psychiatrists are like I went to a psychiatrist who prescribed me like I don't even think it's on the market anymore, Zyprexa. It's
yeah,
an
no,
antipsychotic. I was just
right,
severely depressed. So wait,
right,
I would take it at because you're supposed to take it at night.
uh-huh.
I would black out and I would wake up and I'd have like food all stuck to me because I guess I would get hungry in the middle of the night and I would like go eat whatever I had in my cupboards. And it was like always some weird mashup. I was like in my 20s. So probably had like walnuts and dried cranberries or something. And like, it's like, and I'd be like, I have no recollection of doing any of this. And then she put me on Depakote and like all these heavy duty things. And it's like, I just needed a fucking standard SSRI at a high dose. Like, let's not
Yeah,
complicate things.
right,
Um, so it's like once then I switched doctors and the new doctor was like, "Why are you on all that stuff? You're just like severely depressed. You don't need all of that." I was like, "Huh?" Because like you trust these people. So there's also a different conversation to be had about like, don't give up if something doesn't work for you.
yeah. That's an extremely important piece of advice, and someone told me that. They said, be ready. you know, when they give you the first one, it might not work. And the very first one they gave me, which I don't even know if they still, imipramine, didn't work. But then they gave me desipramine, which is slightly different, and boom, the lead shoes
That
fell
works.
off. And yeah, that was when I was in that really, really long depression. But then
Mhm.
eventually you know, I started to cycle a little bit. So
Yeah. So
yeah,
I
no,
think I always like to say that, and don't be afraid to try something. The worst that could happen is you stay the exact way that you are. Like,
yeah,
you stay just as depressed as you
right.
were, just as manic or whatever it is that you're dealing with. But there is the upside of, hey, I might actually feel better and be able to live a somewhat normal life managing this. So tell us, what do you do now?
What do I do
Like, for
now?
work.
For
What in
work,
your careers? We're talking about toxic workplaces. What do you
I
do?
promote my books. I don't work in a workplace. I'm my boss. I write books, I publish them, and I try to market them. And in addition to writing this very helpful and healing mental health fiction, I also write erotica, which is like more bread and butter. But it's still not enough to live on, and I'm still figuring things out. I also am a personal bookkeeper. I help people who, it's kind of like a finance coach, but it's like I help people who maybe they're earning a lot, but they're also spending what they earn.
Mm,
And I have some tools to help them recognize it, monitor it, and turn it around. And I've done that
mm.
for dozens of people and would love to keep doing it. So I'm actively marketing myself for that too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you
So,
write under a pen name?
well, the erotica is under a pen name, but my
Okay.
writing is under my name, Duncan McLeod. Oh, it's backwards
Okay.
probably on this camera,
No,
huh?
it's not. We got it.
Oh, it's not. I can't tell.
Not
It's
for
backwards
me.
for me.
No, not for
Oh,
me.
okay.
Not.
It is for me.
Yeah.
So yeah, Duncan McLeod is, and my books are on Amazon. If you search for my books, the easiest way is to type in 5150, and then you'll get a bunch of Van Halen albums. So add Duncan or McLeod
Okay.
after 5150, and then you'll get you'll find all my mental health work.
Oh,
I'm
cool.
not gonna. This isn't the right venue for promoting erotica, but the bookkeeping
You
is a
never
website.
know. You never know. I mean,
Yeah, I'm not going to give it away. But the bookkeeping is actually under I have a website for my writing, which is duncanwritesbooks.com. And then I have
okay.
another website, which is duncankeepsbooks.com.
That's
So
pretty
depending
cute.
on
I
which
like
of
that.
those interests you, you can go to
Yeah,
Duncan
that's
Writes
cute.
Books or Duncan Keeps Books to see what I do and learn more about how I'm helping
And
people.
who's your ideal type of client for your Duncan Keeps books?
It would be an influencer, and I'll tell you why in a minute, who's sweet and kind and does not run to anger as their first emotion. Um, these are the words of experience, who is earning a great deal of money, but not finding that they're living from one kind of financial inflow to another without having a reserve. That's
Mm-hmm.
and they recognize it, I guess, and they're ready to do something about it. Because the mistake that a lot of high people in entertainment and other places where they suddenly start making a lot of money, they equate income with wealth, and the two are actually almost not related. I mean, if you
They're
have a high
not.
income, it's faster to get wealth if you can stem your spending. But even if you're earning a little bit, if you put 10% of that aside every, you know, with the 401k or whatever, you
Right, sure.
accumulate wealth. So it's such a basic lesson that I almost feel like I've given it all away just here. But and if you see what you're doing, you have to be able to see what you're spending money on. And there's tools for that. Automated so that you can just look and see reports of like, oh my God, I spent, you know, $3,000 on meals last month, and a normal amount might be 600. So let's see if we can,
Yeah.
you know, go out
Yeah.
to go out to eat a little less and cook a little more.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So is there anything else you want to tell us? I mean, this is such a great conversation. I think we hit on a lot of not necessarily hot button topics, but mental health is always a little It's always a little dicey, I feel like, when you start talking about it, because some people, it can be sort of a polarizing
Yeah.
topic, but we try not to do anything like that. So I think it was a really great, just sort of um, kind conversation of telling your experience and me kind of relating to that. And then, yeah, seeing what we can do. Now I feel like it's sort of almost like if I could get through that, I can get through anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's sort of the
It's
way I feel about my own mental health struggles. And thankfully, my medication works for me. I have no plans on ever getting off of it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. You may have to
Nope.
change it at some point. I'll warn you. That happened to me a couple times where it just kind of stopped working, and
Mm,
be on the lookout for that. If you find yourself going, oh, I think I have some depression symptoms, and they're lasting, that's a good time to talk to your doctor. And it
yeah,
can be a bit that's what kind of happened when I had to take time off from work, but it was because of bipolar, not depression. But I also have done it
sure.
with that dizipramine stopped working, and I had to switch to a couple of other ones over the
Yeah.
years. Um,
Thankfully, I've been on the same one for like, I want to say like 12, 15 years. And I'm like,
as
it's
long as it's
good.
still working and you're feeling
It's
good,
it's still working. Um, and yeah, and I don't have any intentions of getting off of it. Um, yeah, so that's my feeling on that. Is there anything else you want to tell our listeners?
yeah. For the people who are listening who are struggling with a mental health condition, there's a lot of resources for you. I gave you one, the NAMI
Sure.
hotline. But friends and family sometimes can be very helpful, but don't go to the ones that aren't helpful. Don't go to the ones that say all you need is a swift kick in the pants or whatever. You'd reach
Pull
out to the
yourself
right
up by your
people.
bootstraps.
Right. And it can be really hard. Depression for me, when I was in the depths of it, I was down a well, and people are going, you need to do this, you need to do that from the top of a well. Like, I'm in a well, I'm stuck, I can't do anything. You got to put one foot in front of the other and make it to that doctor's office and say, I need help. Just admit you need help. Don't be ashamed. Don't think
Hmm.
that it's going to reflect poorly on you. So many other people are living with this condition, and the more of us who talk about it openly, the better it will be for you. So you too can share about it when you're ready. And yes, it's like coming out, so it may take a while, but do it when you can.
Yeah. Okay, so we know where to reach you.
Hmm.
And well, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us.
Of course.
I also feel like you could do voiceovers or like Audible books because you have such a soothing voice.
Oh, thank you. I do podcasts actually of my fiction. So
Oh,
um,
cool.
yeah, you can find them on any podcasting platform. It's the title is When Everything Cracks, which is the first two books. This book and its sequel combined into
Okay.
When Everything Cracks is the podcast. So I think I
Okay,
forgot to put
sounds
that in my
good.
in my
Yeah.
questionnaire, but yeah. So I do use my voice to be soothing. So thank you.
Yeah, I like it. Okay, well, Duncan, thank you so much. We're going to put all of your contacts in our show notes.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Let's Break Up Toxic Workplace Stories. If you enjoyed our candid conversations and insights, don't forget to hit that like button, follow us on social media, and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform.